comparing CBD molecule to the THC molecule, they look very, very similar. In some ways, they confer similar effects. In other ways, they don't. But they work in the brain and the body in very different ways. And that's what we're going to look at. To understand how CBD and both CBD and THC work in the brain and the body, we need to talk a little bit about the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is an ancient biological communication network within the brain and body. And if we were to break it down, at the risk of oversimplifying, we could break it down into four components, or four areas of components. The first is the receptors in the brain and body that receive these plant cannabinoids, CBD and THC. These receptors, the initial receptor called cannabinoid 1, CB1, which is concentrated in the brain and the central nervous system. It was actually discovered in 1988 by a team of American scientists at St. Louis Medical College. A few years later, the endogenous marijuana-like compounds that our own brain and body produces on a regular basis. They're sort of like CBD and THC, you could say, but they have their own names and they're different molecules. And they're called, the two main ones, anandamide and 2-AG. There are a few other endogenous cannabinoids, marijuana-like molecules, but those are the main ones, and we'll keep those in mind, particularly anandamide, the first one that was discovered, named after Ananda, the Sanskrit word for bliss. So anandamide binds with the CB1 receptor in the brain, and that's what makes people feel high or euphoric, or in some cases dysphoric. Then the other component that we should consider is also the enzymes or proteins in the body that combine to create the cannabinoids, the endogenous cannabinoids, and other enzymes and proteins that interact in such a way as to break down these endogenous compounds. So you have the receptors, you have the endogenous marijuana-like compounds, and then you have the proteins, the metabolic enzymes that are involved in synthesizing or breaking down the endogenous cannabinoids. And there's also another very important part to this that we're going to talk about in a little more detail, and it's only been recently getting more attention among scientists, and that are these transport molecules, fatty acid binding proteins they're called, that the CBD and the THC attach to, almost like they kind of, as if these fatty acid binding proteins are like canoes, that they hop on board and they get transported from outside the cell where the receptors sit to go inside the cell. And that's very interesting. We'll take a journey and follow what happens to CBD when it actually goes within the cells. That's quite fascinating. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what the endocannabinoid system actually does. What is its functions?